one of the things I told you I was going to ask, and you said it's all good, I'm just going to ask you. So that we asked Linda last time is there a piece, this thing won't go up, but behind it, I assure you there's a timeline with all these events. And we're just curious from your own past or from your own education or whatever, if there's a moment that you want to add to that you think is important or to speak to as being critical or educational or whatever to your own development and perhaps to others.
Well, not quite a timeline, but I was born on July 28, 1953. That's an important moment in history, by the way. In 10 days, boom, you can celebrate, okay? No one moment. One thing I've talked a lot about is the role of black unionists in driving the March on Washington. We want to put that out there for a lot of reasons. There's a tendency, as we get excited over social change and rebellion revolution, to focus on some segments of the black revolt. But I always say that when there's some sort of deeply felt sense of black activism, there's always a work of manifestation of that. Okay? And so when you talk about what was happening around civil rights historically, that's also seen in the increase in black union activity, both, as I said before, against the boss and against racism inside unions. And what had happened in the latter part of the 50s was an attempt of black unionists in unions like the steel workers, auto workers, and other major unions to say, wait a second, we're going to do a fight. And they want to protest the racism inside of the labor movement and the racism in the workplace. They said, we need to kind of march on Washington. And then kind of, oh, guess what, these people doing the same thing, SCLC and so forth, you ought to join forces. And it's important that when you think about actually turning bodies out, it wasn't simply a phenomenal speech, it was actually nuts and bolts. So black unionists and the auto workers, the Teamsters, the teachers in Chicago, Detroit, in New York, and Philly, got union buses and brought folk to DC. So we miss this notion of the role of black unionists, who maybe seem being kind of moderate, with a backbone for some important struggles. So I want to put it out. Yeah?
Thank you for that. So I want to come back to that for a second, in a second, rather. I guess I'm curious for you as working where you do at the Labor Center, in your life as an economist, and thinking about how one of the things that emerged to manage this crisis in capitalism, these rebellions from below, these different divisions and fractures, is neoliberalism, the political project, or however we want to call it, neoliberalism. And I'm curious if you could speak to how, I'm trying to think of a succinct way to put it, how the long moment from that time to this that we're living in, and how we understand waging economic struggle or social struggle today, living in the wake of that project.
Just that.
For warriors. I mentioned to Isaac that if folks thought it was important, I wouldn't mind coming back to talk more about kind of economic crises that we'll kind of talk a bit about in terms of balance of payments and the values of the dollar, that kind of stuff. But I want to do it more kind of formally in an educated way, by the way. But given that crisis, let's say it exists in the early part of the 70s, there are a lot of ways that capital could have responded to that. Okay? And they chose to go on attack in terms of, from the perspective of the United States now, kind of one view of the golden age, you're raising, right? Gold who all people, right? To stop what was called the social compact with labor, sever that, and go on attack. And that meant that we saw a declining role of the state in terms of being advocate for people. And not saying it was that way universally, by the way, but in terms of kind of late 30s, and 70s, it played a stronger role in advocating because of power struggle for people. That was ceased. A rising role of the market to dictate outcomes. Once again, it's always been there, but a rising role. And we saw a result of that, the rise in inequality in a lot of things. That to me is the essence of neoliberalism. I really, maybe as an economist, I kind of hate to focus on ideas. Because more important than kind of a market ideology is the practice of reorganizing society. And how from that practice comes some ideas, including some interaction, by the way. That's just the starting point. And then we see kind of the erosion of various forms of publicness, you might say, that allow divisions amongst us to be heightened and kind of results in what I call the 40-year beatdown. And because the divisions amongst the people will respond to it differently. So in a simple world, you might say that we had a beatdown of the entire working class, and black folks voted for Obama 90%, and half the white folks voted for Trump in a different election. Right? But still the beatdown, and the question that we need to think about is why the different responses? And how do we get that organized around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can expand on it. I guess my second question, and I'm going to turn it over because I feel like people are waiting for a really good question, is you talked about maybe didn't write it, the worker manifestation of black activism in the period that we were discussing, and the push and pull between the two and the momentum that's created. I'm curious how you see that in the intervening years between this period that we're talking about and current.
It may not be up on the timeline, but one expression, if you think of, it's a bad term by the way, but like a better term, kind of the black power phase of the activism, there were a lot of examples of the black worker manifestation. Now we discussed one in Detroit, the formation of the League of Representative Black Workers, but throughout the labor movement we saw a lot of black caucuses being developed with various degrees of militancy, some very militant, some more moderate. Okay? In particular, you saw in 1972, the formation was called the Coalition of Black Trade Unions. It's important because we hear more and more reference for Bayard Rustin, talking being the black pacifist gay activist. He's also a socialist, right? A. Philip Randolph, also a socialist. But they began to moderate the activism in the 60s. And they began to get inside the House of Labor, AFL-CIO. And it started what's called the A. Philip Randolph Institute. That's kind of a moderate element of black activism. In the black spectrum, conservative, but in the larger spectrum, moderate. But what happened as the AFL became, as an institution became more conservative given the times, it meant that as a federation they were neutral around Nixon in '68. It was waffled on the war in Vietnam. And then when Nixon ran against McGovern, they wanted to be neutral again. Black folks said, the hell with that. And the more progressive black unions formed the Coalition of Black Trade Unions. People actively involved in the Memphis strike. Bill Lucey was one of the founders. People have been historically on the black labor left, going back to the 40s. So one example, kind of black power and manifestations of that in labor. I think kind of today, if you want to call it, for lack of a better term, kind of Black Lives Matter moment, you've also seen kind of upsurges in black worker activism. Okay, so a guy that we work with at the Labor Center, he's active in ASME here, right? He got excited over Black Lives Matter, what can we do? And so what happened in a lot of unions, so have various forms of racial justice commissions that really were expressed from below, saying, wait a second, we had this moment of activism, what does it mean for us? It's an important example of that, both at the AFL level, SCIU, and locals, they said, wait, what can we do? That's a different example.